Connect Run Club podcast, episode number 89. Dr. Jack Daniels. Hey, welcome back, runners, to the Connect Run Club podcast. Excited to be with you today, and really excited to talk to one of my all-time favorite running industry experts. And in fact, if you recall, expert after expert, we would say, hey, who's the voice, who's the voice? And the guy we kept hearing was Dr. Jack Daniels. So I was really envious of this episode. I did not.
Yeah, you were hurt.
I was hurting.
It was me. It was me doing the interview. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this was back from our virtual running summit back in February. This summer, we've been pulling some of those interviews as we kind of taken a break from the interviews for the Run Club podcast. But this is a great one, and we're releasing this one for the first time to you guys. Like Trey said, Jack is the guy that everyone else looks to. Yeah. So he is like the coach of the coaches. So if you've ever wondered where all this training philosophy comes from, a lot of it you can kind of root back to Jack. And he has one of the best profile pictures, I think, of anyone.
Legendary.
It's an awesome cowboy hat. He looks like an old John Wayne, or I guess like a current John Wayne, because he's old too. Yep. But we dive into all kinds of stuff. It's a great interview with Jack Daniels. So.
It is. Hey, speaking of great, have you been watching any of the Olympic trials?
I have a little bit. I saw some people getting mad about Justin Gatlin, saying that he's just our great sprinter, and then he's been caught doping twice. And so I saw some people upset about that.
Let me tell you something. I think many. Well, I'm not going to go there, but I do not think he is alone. Yes, I do not think he is alone.
Hey, we'll win somehow. We'll get there
somehow, some way.
Yes, that's going on. We actually are going to have some fun stuff going on during the Olympics, so stay tuned with us in August. But in the meantime, before we get to the Olympics, we're doing something fun over on our Facebook group and our Strava club. We're doing a summer running challenge. Here, I actually have a logo.
And it does not require doping.
It does not require doping.
There you go.
And let me throw it up. Here it is. Ooh. Summer running challenge. So hold it. Yeah. So it's a blast. Basically, you're going to run the first week in July, so next Monday when this goes out, through August, the end of August. And if you run 3 times a week, 20 minutes a day, 4 weeks straight, you're going to be entered to win a free pair of running shoes of your choice. So we're not just going to send you a random pair. And then also each week, if you've done those runs, you're going to be entered to win a random drawing.
So it's 4 weeks long.
4 weeks long. Okay. A lot of you guys are probably already doing it, so there's really no reason why you wouldn't go ahead and throw in your hat. And plus, you guys get connected with our awesome Facebook group and our Strava page.
It's a lot of fun.
Lots of folks running. It's kind of cool now because on Strava you can go in, and I'll throw it up so you guys can see. We can see the runs that folks are doing each morning. And so, that's the admin. The activity, there we go. So at the time of this recording, this is on a Wednesday, but we've already had lots of folks already out doing runs. A lot of people are joining too. So you guys want to check that out, and you can do that, Trey, if you would like to join it.
Where can you do that?
ConnectRunClub.com/summer challenge.
I like that.
So let's dive into our interview with Dr. Jack Daniels. All right, we want to welcome you guys back to the Running Summit. We've got Dr. Jack Daniels on the phone with us today. He's a 2-time Olympic medalist in the modern pentathlon and world-renowned exercise scientist. Runner's World named him the best running coach. He also led Cortland University to 8 NCAA Division III national championships, 31 individual national titles, and more than 130 All-American awards. He's coached 7 athletes to U.S. Olympic team and has advised dozens of Olympians and medalists. And you may know him from writing the Daniels Running Method, which came out in 1998, which I know has influenced a lot of our runners. But Dr. Daniels, we're excited about chatting with you today. So welcome to the Running Summit.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Well, we would love to dive into your kind of running background. In a lot of our interviews, we kind of start with, how did running become a part of your life? How did that impact you growing up?
I was a terrible runner. And I grew up as a swimmer.
Okay.
And in college, I competed on the swim team at the University of Montana and also shot on the rifle team. So my 2 sports were shooting and swimming. And then I went in the Army and sent to Korea for a year. And over there, they had a military triathlon. And the 3 events in the triathlon that they had were pistol shooting, swimming, and running.
Gotcha.
And I won in my competition. I won the swim and I won the shoot, and I came in last in the run. And that was the first time I'd ever run in my life, anything. And I didn't care for it. But it qualified me to be sent to San Antonio, Texas, Fort Sam Houston, where they trained modern pentathletes. So I was sent down there to try to learn how to fence and to ride a horse and to run.
Okay.
And the training was incredibly demanding. For 2.5 years, 6 days a week, in the saddle at 5:30 in the morning till 7:30, then breakfast, then 2 hours of fencing, then a half an hour break, then an hour and a half swimming, then another hour or so break, and then pistol shooting, and then another break and dinner, and then running from 7 to 7:30 till 9 p.m. and in the saddle at 5:30 the next morning. Mm-hmm. So I hated running. Number one, it was my weakest event of the 5 pentathlon events.
Yeah.
And number two, in training, they made it so we trained running the last thing every day, 7:30 till 9 p.m. after we'd done all the other sports. So it wasn't comfortable. Then I moved to Sweden when I got out of the Army and went to a sports school over there and learned a whole lot more about the physiology of running and got interested in how to train to be a better runner because I was so weak. I wanted to learn how to be better. And that's how I got into it. And then I came back to the U.S. and the job I had, my boss had a high school son who was on a running team in Norman, Oklahoma. And yes, he thought I could coach running because I'd been in the Olympics. And so I tried some of the things I learned in my physiology over in Sweden. And this kid ran really, really well. And then his father became the vice president of a college that didn't have a team. And he said, we're going to start it so my son can come here to run. Do you want to be the coach?
Yeah.
So that's how I got started in coaching. And through my pentathlon, I had some recruits from Australia. I had a freshman Australian who won Texas, Kansas, and Drake relays while I was at Oklahoma City University. I mean, I just recruited a really, really good runner.
Yeah.
I didn't make him that good, but the more good runners I was around, the more I started learning, and then I started doing a lot of research while I was in Oklahoma City. And my subjects were from Oklahoma State and Kansas State. And those were the days when Jeremiah was at Kansas, so he was one of my subjects. And Don Von Ruden from Oklahoma State and Conrad Nightingale from Kansas State, all three of them were Olympians. And they became subjects in my altitude research. So I naturally learned a lot from those elite runners, plus what I learned in my physiology studies. I kind of put them together, and that's where I got into coaching.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Kind of going back a little bit, is the 56 and 60 Olympics that you were in?
Yeah, 56 in Melbourne and 60 in Rome.
Were you doing, were you getting any coaching at that point from the running side of things, or kind of what was running like? Was it still just a part of the pentathlon that you didn't like, or had you kind of started to get into it?
Well, I didn't mind it. I never had a coach.
Gotcha.
Because when I was in the Army in Fort Sam Houston, Texas for 2.5 years, we had a really, really good fencing master, a Hungarian guy who had been through the Budapest Fencing Academy, and he was really outstanding fencing coach. But to save money, the head of the organization just told him he was also going to be the running coach.
That's awesome.
And he had no clue what was going on.
Yeah.
The first 6 weeks that I ever ran for a running coach, which was this guy, the first 6 weeks, my training was each evening, 7:30 till 9, warm up a mile, put on your spikes on the center track, run 8 or 10 400s as hard as you can
Jeez.
and go home. And I did that 5 days a week for 6 weeks.
My gosh.
And so you can see it would kind of turn you off for the sport.
Yeah.
Because number one, all we did was run as hard as we could for short distances. And we didn't have nobody told us how to run a race. So when we had a race, we just went hard and died. And after about a half mile, you just staggered in the rest of the way.
Yeah, I can imagine not enjoying it too much if that's all you're doing.
No, it wasn't enjoyable at all.
What was your running like in the Olympics, like compared to other folks out there? Was it pretty far back compared to everything else?
Yeah, well, I can tell you in the Rome Olympics, well, in Melbourne, I got second in the riding. Actually, for some reason, I really took the horseback riding. I'd never been on a horse in my life.
Yeah.
But I took it. In fact, I was ranked first in the world in the riding event.
Really?
In modern pentathlon.
Yeah.
And in Melbourne, I've been doing pentathlon for 4 months total, and I got second in the ride. And in Rome, 4 years later, after I'd been doing all 4 sports quite a bit, there I rode well. There were 60 competitors. Out of 60 competitors, I got 11th in the fence. I got 9th in the chute. I got 3rd in the run, swim, 3rd in the swim, and I got 25th out of 60 in the run.
Gotcha.
So I was just in the top half, you might say. A couple of years later, after I'd learned a little bit more about running in the World Championships in Mexico City, I placed 14th in the run out of 50. So, and that was still my weakest event, 14th in the run.
Gotcha. That makes sense. What was it? The fact that you needed to coach when you moved to coaching in college? What was it that kept bringing you back to running? Was it kind of always there, or was there ever like a moment you're like, hey, I kind of fell in love with the sport at that point?
Well, it was weird. I really did kind of fall in love with it when I was coaching at Oklahoma City University. Mm. I had three pretty good Australian runners on my team that I'd recruited, and I had a great Native American kid from Montana that I'd recruited. We beat Oklahoma and Oklahoma State in cross country as a team, and we had a school of 1,200 total students.
Yeah.
So you can't help but kind of like it if your team is doing that well.
Yeah.
You get pretty excited. And then we got a new president, and he dropped the sport completely. And I was at nationals, and one of my Australian guys actually got 5th at Division I nationals in the 3 mile. That was before they made it a 5K. And while I was at that nationals, we were told that our sport was being dropped at OCU, and there was an ad on a wall at the national meet that they were looking for a national coach in Peru. So I figured, well, why not? So I applied for that, and they gave me the job. And the interesting thing about that was, the lucky part about that was that they hired 2 Americans to be the Peruvian national track and field coaches.
Okay.
And the other guy who was hired along with me was unbelievably good coach. First thing he taught me, he says, coaches don't make runners, runners make coaches. He was saying that because he had just retired from Ohio State. In his first year that he coached at Ohio State, he had a guy on his team named Jesse Owens. And that made him a coach.
Yeah, that would make me a coach, I think, if I had him.
So I learned a lot from Larry. Larry Snyder was the Ohio State coach. I learned a lot about the mental side of training, and a lot about high jump, long jump, sprinting, hurdles. So he took all those kinds of events, and I took the distance events down in Peru.
Yeah,
that's why I really got into the altitude too, because many of my runners were from 8 and 10, 12,000 feet of altitude.
Yeah, that's
when I came back from there, I that's when I went back to college to get my PhD at Wisconsin, and my director was Bruno Balke, who was a beautiful altitude researcher from Germany. He was brought to the United States by the U.S. Air Force to help them start our space program. And he was my director for all my PhD work, and we did lots of altitude research together.
Gotcha. That's incredible. I think what's crazy about your story, we've talked with a lot of folks over the past couple of weeks, and a lot of them kind of came to running just as they almost out of the womb, like running's all they knew. But it seems like you've come from it from so many different angles, whether it's pentathlon or altitude research, or even going out of the country down to Peru. What were some of the impacts on your later coaching? You say you drew from other sports, whether swimming or horseback riding, but did you see influence in just kind of how you approached coaching as a result of your background?
Yeah, I think part of it is learning to focus on the task at hand. I really learned that in the riding event. In other words, our riding event in pentathlon, in those days, it's changed now, but it used to be a 5,000-meter cross country on a horse that you drew from lot. You'd never seen them before, and that there were about 26 jumps to negotiate with your horse. So what you really had to do was focus on what you were doing. You couldn't, and we rode 5 minutes apart, so there wasn't a race. It was doing the very best you can with what you've got to work with. So that I really learned that about coaching, is that it's really important to focus on what you're doing, not worry about what the other people are doing. You have no control over them. They have no control over you. You have control over yourself. And if you have a great race, then you did a good job. And if you have beaten somebody else who's better than you, and that's that. So I think I carried that over into running a lot. Is the importance, number one, of focusing on what you're doing, whether it's in training or in racing. And number two is to answer this one real simple question about every workout you do. What is the purpose of this workout? And if you can't answer that question, then why are you doing it? So there's got to be a purpose for everything you do, whether you go out for a long, easy, slow run, or whether you do a bunch of fast repetitions, 200s and 400s, or if you do some hard interval thousands. What's the purpose? Why are you doing it? And those purposes I learned through all my physiology research. Why the different kinds of workout I learned from physiology, but I also learned it from a lot of the great runners. You know, I had in my dissertation in 1968, I had 26 of the top runners in the United States who were my subjects. And I had George Young and Conrad Nightingale and Jim Ryan and Bob Schul, gold medalists from the 64 Olympics, Tom Von Ruden. I mean, I had the best distance runners in the United States. And believe it or not, 25 years later, in 1993, all 26 of them came back and let me test them again. And I just finished testing them 2 years ago, in 2013. 45 years, the same guys came back. It's unbelievable what you learn.
Yeah. What were some of the things you found from that?
Well, it's very interesting. Number one, that everybody's an individual. You can't treat everybody the same. I mean, you can give them similar types of training, but not exactly the same. It's got to be adjusted for what their ability currently is. And so the things you learn from those guys, it's amazing. Way back in, 47, 48 years ago now is when I first tested them. And lots of questions got asked about what they did, how many miles they did. As I remember, the whole group averaged about 85 miles a week back then, and this included 800, 1,500 steeplechasers, 5 and 10K guys. And Most of them did resistance training, which is starting to get more popular now, resistance training.
Mm-hmm.
But they were doing it in the 1960s. And they did probably more short repetition type training than is popular now. And I still think repetition is the way to go.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know one of the big things in your training, and actually Trey, who's normally with us, I think he's actually done a couple coaching programs with you, and he mentioned just from the outset just how individualized that training is. If you're, a lot of our runners are they're not beginners, but they're kind of getting into the further distances or wanting to set a new PR. How do you begin coaching someone and kind of take them through things that are individual to them? Like, what are some of the different factors you're looking for when you start coaching somebody new?
Well, it depends on whether it's a college person who's coming out of a high school program or whether it's somebody who's just taking up running kind of as an adult.
Yeah.
Makes quite a bit of difference. I would first have them fill out a little profile questionnaire. In other words, how old are you? How much do you weigh? How tall are you? How much running have you done? What are you doing right now in terms of running? What races have you run within the last 6 or 8 months that might give me an idea of what kind of shape you're in, things like that.
Yeah.
You have to start off by finding out what this person is currently designed to like.
Yeah.
And what they can handle. I mean, I've coached quite a few people who had no problem running 150 or 160 miles a week, and had others who just struggle to do 100. I mean, even if they're marathoners.
Yeah.
I don't think the short distance guys do that much, but it's so individual. I had a girl in college who never ran over 30 miles a week, and any week in high school. And her freshman year with me, she never ran over 30 miles in 1 week, and she won nationals in cross country.
Wow.
You know, Division III, obviously, but still, she beat a lot of good runners.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say, "Oh, you're lucky. It's only a 5K then." And that's next spring, running 30 miles a week. She won nationals in the 10K. So people are different, and you have to be able to deal with that. You know, I had a girl whose best high school time was 2:39 for 100 when she came to college. And by the time she graduated, she won 7 national championships, and then she went to the 10 relays, and then 33:01 and won the 10K. So people can improve a lot.
Yeah.
And I love to use Tom Von Ruden as an example, who was a great runner from Oklahoma State and placed 9th in the '68 Olympics in the 1500. And Tom, the interesting thing about Tom is his high school PR in the mile was 4:34.
Mm.
You know, and nowadays you hear people go, "Oh, if you can't run 4:10, you're not going anywhere."
Mm-hmm.
And people mature at different stages in their life. I mean, think about Magdalena Louis. I've worked with Magdalena since 2002, and she won Western States Ultra 100 miler.
Yeah.
A year or so ago. And I mean, the things that she has done are just incredible. She ran all her lifetime PRs when she was 39 years old. How about a 4:14 1500 as a 39-year-old woman?
Mm-hmm.
That's not too bad.
Now I know a lot of folks will know you for VDOT and your work with VO2 Max. Was that in the 70s when you were working on that?
Yes, it was. I used data from my research in the 60s and 70s.
Okay.
And I worked with one of my runners from Oklahoma City University, Jimmy Gilbert. And Jimmy, a strange guy in the sense that his 2 events in track and field were long distance running and pole vaulting.
Yeah, that's a good combo right there.
Yeah, that's quite a combo.
Yeah.
And he got hired by NASA.
Huh.
And he wrote computer programs for the space programs. And he did all. I mean, he was brilliant in physics and math, and he did all the calculations for the VDOT formulas. And the big benefit of the VDOT system is that you're basing your training on your recent race performance.
Okay.
In other words, what's the best measure of what kind of shape you're in is how fast can you race. You know, and a lot of coaches would say, we're going to train harder so that you will race faster. And I would rather say, I want to see you race faster so you can afford to train harder.
That's good.
In other words, the racing should determine the training, rather than just, we're going to work harder and hopefully race faster. When one of my runners comes to me and said, I think I can do that workout faster than you're asking me to do it, my answer is, prove it in a race. Prove that you deserve to train faster by racing faster.
That's good.
They don't give medals for training. They give them for racing.
For those,
the
go ahead.
VDOT system is really good, I think.
Yeah, for those that may not be familiar with it, can you kind of walk us through how it works? And I know you've got some great resources online with the Run Smart Project and the VDOT calculator, but just for those that may have not have heard of it before, how does it kind of work, and how can folks use it in their running?
Well, it basically the VDOT is based on how economical you are in running and what your aero power is, your VO2 max. If you put those two things together, it gives you a velocity at VO2 max, a VDO2 max.
Okay.
In other words, if you extrapolate your economy curve out to your max, and then drop a vertical line to the horizontal axis, it will arrive at a speed of running that is associated with the combination of your running economy and your VO2 max.
Okay.
And according to Jimmy's calculations, you can race at that speed for about 11 minutes and 3 seconds. And you can race at 105% of that speed for about 5 minutes.
Okay.
And you can race at at about 93.6% of that speed for 30 minutes. So it's not a matter of the distance of the race, it's a matter of the time of the race. In other words, a person who runs a 30-minute 10K is running at about 93.6 or 7% of their VO2 max.
Okay.
And if somebody else races a 4-mile and takes them 30 minutes, they're also running at 93.7% of their max.
Okay.
So it's a function of what's the duration of the race, not the distance of the race. So then you can calculate. We can calculate based on your race. We can go backwards, and based on the speed of your race, you know what the duration determines what fraction of your max you work at, and you can calculate VDOT number from that.
Gotcha. Is VDOT, is it like your max, like ever? Like, are you able to increase your VDOT or?
Oh yeah, you increase it every time you run a faster race.
Okay, gotcha. So it's all dependent on your most recent race results. Is that right?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And and there's a VDOT value associated with any time you run for any race. And for instance, it's really interesting if we use our calculations to calculate the VDOT associated with all the world records for men, they are all within about 2 VDOT numbers are the same. All the way down to the 1500, all the way up to the marathon.
Okay.
The VDOTs are going to be almost the same. Same for women. They're all within about 2 VDOT numbers of exactly the same. Now, if you have a VDOT of like 60, you might be able to run that 60 might be associated with a certain speed for a mile, and it's also associated with a certain speed for a marathon. But that doesn't mean if you can run that mile time that you can just automatically run that marathon time, because you may not be training for the marathon. It just says that physiologically those are equal performances.
That makes sense. What's the highest VDOT that you've seen?
About 85 per
okay.
man. 80, I think 84.6 or 7. I don't have it right in front of me, but it's there, and it's in the 74.1, I think, for women.
Okay, gotcha. How does temperature and altitude? I know that those are some ways you can affect the calculation online, but how do those? I know you did some altitude research. How do those affect it?
Well, obviously, the higher the altitude, the more it affects it. But you can come up with different formulas that will adjust how much each so many feet of altitude will affect your time. And it's the same. You could come up with calculations like that as how different temperatures will affect your time. If you're running in 90 degrees, you're not going to run as fast at 10K as you're running in 80 degrees or 70 degrees.
Right.
So you can come up with little formulas that kind of give you an idea how much slower you need to go based on the temperature, based on the altitude. It's one of the biggest things about the temperature problem is how people vary individually. It's incredible. They don't vary as much with the altitude factor as they do with the heat factor.
Gotcha.
We did a study down in Phoenix one year. It wasn't real hot. It was in April, and it was in the 80s, I think, or high 70s. And we had two guys who ran. They raced a 25K, and they ran within 1 minute of the same time. They were the same height and within 1 pound of the same weight, so they were identical guys. And during their race, they both drank exactly 1 liter, 2.2 pounds of fluid. And at the end of the race, one of them weighed 3.5 pounds less than when he started the race, and the other one weighed 8 pounds less than when he started the race.
Gotcha.
It's a big, big variation difference. When you start trying to figure out how much you need to drink based on the conditions, that's a very individual thing.
Yeah, definitely. We've got a couple questions we're going to get to coming in from the audience, and this one I think is pretty broad, so we might start here. Holly was asking, are there any habits or traits that you would say are the most important for runners who are wanting to compete at the elite level? I know you said everything was individualized, but are there some generalities that you found with your research and your coaching?
Oh, well, I've always said that there are several ingredients of success.
Okay.
And the first one is what you're born with. It's easy to see that in some sports. For instance, in football. If you're fully grown, you're 20 years old, you're through growing, and you're 5'2", and you weigh 106 pounds, you're not going to make it in the NFL.
Yeah.
I don't care how highly motivated you are. You just don't have the body to do it.
Yeah.
So people are born with different bodies. And in running, they might be the same height and the same weight and all that, but they could vary tremendously in terms of cardiac function or biomechanics at the joint angles and things like that. And you have no control over that. You're born with certain characteristics. So that's a very important ingredient of success. And the second one is motivation, intrinsic motivation. How much do you want to do something that you have the ability to do? And not how much do your parents want you to do it, or your boyfriend or girlfriend, but how much do you want to do it? If you've got a guy, you're the basketball coach at a high school, and a kid transfers into your school from another school, and he's 6'10" and beautifully built, and he's quick and light on his feet, and he can jump everywhere. You're dreaming you're going to be winning the conference this year in basketball, but this guy wants to be a concert pianist. That's what his motivation is.
Yeah.
So that's not going to make him great.
Right.
He'll be okay, but he's not going to be great. So you have to want to do what it is, and you have to have the ability to do it. And then number 3, you got to have the opportunity. Fortunately in running, the opportunity is much more available than some sports. For instance, like tennis. Maybe you're beautifully designed and highly motivated to be a tennis star, but there's nobody to play against. Or maybe you're highly motivated and designed to be a downhill skier, but you live in Miami, Florida. You're not going to have the opportunity to ski.
Right.
So you have to have those three ingredients. And then the fourth ingredient is direction. Somebody to coach you or help you take advantage of the ability that you have based on your desire to do it. So it varies. People vary so much, We're just not equal.
Right.
Sorry to say that, but we're not.
Right. Has there been, through your coaching, has there been a common problem you find people come, when they come to you to coach, whether it's your college students or just folks that you're training, is there some common pieces that they have that you say this is something that maybe we should address?
In other words, some problem that they have to be dealt with?
Not a problem, but is there like maybe on the mental side of things, is there like a common mental piece that folks kind of struggle with that you find you're having to coach people through on a pretty regular basis?
Well, one that I can think of is learning to be an optimist rather than a pessimist. And a big difference there is that optimists internalize good behavior. If they have a good workout or a good race, they take advantage and they say, I did that. And if they have a bad one, they say, well, today just wasn't my day. Whereas a pessimist, if they have a really good performance, they say, man, was I lucky today? They don't take credit for it.
Yeah.
And they have a bad one, they say, yeah, that's me. So you have to learn to be optimistic about what you're doing. You take credit for the good things that you do and assume that everyone has bad days now and then, and that's okay. That doesn't mean you're bad. It just means that things weren't right yet. And people really, really, when you're talking about beginning running, people progress at such tremendously different rates. I've had runners come to me from high school and college, and this one improves almost completely in 1 year by the time they're a sophomore, and then this one takes until they're a senior to make the same improvement. And a lot of that is related to what else is going on in your life.
Right.
What kind of class schedule do you have? Lab schedule do you have? Do you have to work? What kind of roommates do you have in it? There's so many different factors that play a part in how well you can really get into what you're doing.
That's good. How do you coach optimism?
Well, you just teach people that every time. Well, I'd say as a coach, the most important thing is to make positive comments about everything every time whenever you talk to one of your runners. I mean, if one of my runners came to me and said, man, I felt terrible today, the worst thing I could say is, yeah, and you looked awful too. I could maybe say, well, I'm really sorry that you didn't feel good on today's workout, but we've been working on having you carry your arms down a little lower, and you were really doing that. You were looking a lot better today. Find something good to say all the time. And sure, you can agree that things weren't well, but that doesn't mean you're bad. It just means today that something wasn't right. That's all. That's
awesome. And I think that can apply. That doesn't even have to be running. That's just a great way to live by. Okay, so we've got several more questions, and one is asking, this is coming from Howard Elkman. He's asking just about treadmills in general. So what are your thoughts on training on a treadmill? Any pros or cons or things to keep in mind when you're approaching it?
I'm a big treadmill believer.
Okay.
Let's put it that way. And a lot of people hate them.
Yeah.
And hating them doesn't mean they're not good.
Right.
I'll tell you one of the best advantages of a treadmill program. I was coaching a pretty good runner some years ago, and he'd run 2 or 3 212 marathons. Pretty good.
Yeah.
And he moved to a new city, and he didn't like doing his long runs in this new city. He just didn't like the area. So he ran a weekly 20-miler on his treadmill.
Really?
Yep. And went to New York City, ran 209 and got second.
My gosh.
And I mean, that's all mental.
Right.
Come on, if you ran about 8 or 10 20-milers on your treadmill for 2 hours, a 209 marathon is going to go by like a flash of light.
Especially in New York. Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah. No, and I used to have my college team do treadmill workouts every year. And there are so many different combinations of speed and grade that you can work with. You know, I've got tables that say, okay, if you're running at 6 miles an hour, which is a 10-minute mile pace, but you're at a 20% grade, that's the same as running at a 4:30 mile pace. The work is. You know, so we'll play around with different grades and speeds and do workouts like a minute on, minute off for 10 times or something like that. You know, just little things because you got to work. I mean, you can make treadmill work darn hard. And one of the biggest advantages of having a treadmill available for you, of course, is if you live in a terribly cold place and you can get a good workout without having to go outside and freeze to death. Or the same thing applies in a very, very hot place. Maybe you want to do a really good quality workout, but it's 105 degrees out and 80% humidity. You can't do it, but you can do it on treadmill.
Yeah.
You know, and so there are lots of advantages of having them available. I'm not saying that that's the answer. You know, we try to convince people to turn over at about 180 steps a minute.
Okay.
That whole thing, and you read it all the time about 180 being the number, and that all came from my wife and I sitting at the 1984 Olympics watching all the track and field events, and all we did was count stride rates. Hardly paid any attention to the race. All we did was count stride rates. We had 47 different athletes we put in our research. And of those 47 athletes, one took fewer than 180 steps a minute. So that's where the whole idea about good runners learn to turn over.
Right.
You know, they don't bound along, they roll along. And so a treadmill is the world's greatest place to practice stride rate, because if I have a runner who's turning over real slow, like 160, and I say to them, try to turn over a little faster, then they just run faster.
Right.
But if you're on a treadmill and I say, try to turn over faster, we don't have to change the speed. The speed is set. But you'll learn stride rate.
That's that's great.
There's lots of advantages of treadmill. I'm not saying that they should replace outdoor running, but I'm saying you ought to take advantage of what they have to offer you.
That's good. I did not expect you to be so pro treadmill. So that's really interesting though. But yeah, the stride rate, and just being able to a very controlled environment.
Oh yeah,
so many advantages to it.
You could even set a metronome out there and say, "Here, stride with this metronome."
Yeah, that's
without changing the speed of the pace.
How does and this is a question coming in from Jason KOE. I think he says your thoughts on technique and how it affects training. So I know you're talking about stride rate, but how does the actual your running form? How much do you coach that, or versus how much is that you think you're just born with? And how does that just affect your running in general?
I don't do a whole lot about form. I like to, number one, I like to work on stride rate.
Okay.
And I'm not too worried about whether they land forefoot, midfoot, or rear foot. I've done research comparing how much energy it costs runners to run at the same speed, whether they landed with the heel first, or the midfoot, or the forefoot. And it usually costs a little bit less to run rear foot.
Okay.
Than forefoot, but basically they're almost identical.
Right.
So it's not a big problem there. You know, what you need to do is run what's most comfortable. and learn to just, if you learn to turn over, if you learn to get the stride rate down there to about 180 or so, and obviously people who race the 800 and the 50, and they're going 190, 200, which isn't as economical, but they're not worrying about being so economical. They're trying to get from point A to point B as fast as they can.
Right.
So their stride rate gets really fast. I remember in '84 Olympics, Seb Coe was one of the people we tested, and he was about 204 or something like that stride rate. So people turn over faster on those shorter races. But from the 3,000 all the way to the marathon, the 3, the 5, the 10 of the marathon, the stride rates were almost identical.
Gotcha.
So they just took shorter strides for the longer races because you're not running quite as fast. And mechanics, you need to probably try not to raise your shoulders. You know, a lot of people kind of shrug their shoulders up when they run. Well, that's muscle contractions cause that. So relax your shoulders. I'll often tell my runners when they're just running, start with your head and go right down your body and say, is my face relaxed? Is my jaw relaxed? Are my shoulders relaxed? Are my arms relaxed? Are my hips relaxed? Are my knees relaxed? Are my feet relaxed? Just go through that while you're running along and see if you can find places in your body where things aren't great. I had one of my subjects who was an Olympian also. He had a really great statement once about discomfort when you're racing. He said, when you're racing and you're feeling pain, try to identify where that pain is and start thinking about some part of your body that isn't hurting. So quit thinking about the part that's hurting and start thinking about the part that isn't hurting.
Yeah.
Are your eyes hurting? No. Okay, well, think about your eyes then. Quit thinking about your legs if they're what hurts. So the technique thing, you know, obviously I'm not too excited about people carrying their hands way up by their chin when they run. They ought to relax their arms. Let the arms just balance what those are doing, rather than trying to determine what everything else does.
Right. That makes a ton of sense. You got to relax, and stay positive even when you're hurting. So even applies to your body. But
Great.
So there's a couple questions we've liked asking kind of everyone we've talked with, and the first one is, you've probably done quite a few of these, just races or running experiences. But is there one that really stands out to you as like one of your favorite moments, whether in your running career or in your coaching career?
My favorite moment?
Yeah.
Both of them have nothing to do with a performance.
Okay.
I was the first non-Swede to win the Swedish national championships in modern pentathlon.
Okay.
And when I finished that, and the run's always the last event, so it's kind of like you win the thing as a function of the run, but
yeah,
your run might be your worst event. And when I finished it, a little girl about 10 years old went over into a field and picked some flowers and brought them and gave them to me.
Oh,
that's the most memorable thing I've ever had.
That's awesome.
Have nothing to do with performance. And I got a picture of her giving me those flowers, and it's up on my wall. And I got 2 Olympic medals somewhere in some drawer someplace.
That's incredible.
And a Soviet guy named Igor Novikov was the world's best modern pentathlon athlete. This guy, and of the 5 events, he won 4 of them one time at the World Championships. 4 of the 5 individual events he was capable of winning. The only one he didn't win was the horseback riding. And he won the World Championships 4 times and went to 4 Olympics, and we became really good friends. And the last year I saw him, he brought me one of those little Russian cluster dolls that inside different ones. He said his wife had him give it to me. Now, you can't get a better thing than that.
That's awesome.
You know, I mean, I never met her, but he obviously talked to her about me. I talked to my friends about him, and she sends me a cluster doll. Come on.
That's good.
Those are the kind of things you remember. The
Yeah.
people you meet. Winning is fine, but it's not the end of the world.
That's really good. One of the other questions we like to ask everybody as well is, do you have any resources that you recommend? Whether it's your training, your books, or are there folks that you watch and you follow that you think they're just doing a great job in the coaching side of things?
I'm not clear exactly what you're asking now.
So are there any coaches or runners or just resources that you find yourself recommending to people as you're coaching?
Oh, brother. No, I don't.
Okay.
I guess that I'm a zero reader.
Okay.
I don't read.
Okay.
I would have to say since high school, I've probably read 3 books.
Okay.
But I've read textbooks.
Gotcha.
I don't count that as reading. I mean, that's studying.
Okay.
So the only books I've ever read since I was a kid have been required reading. For some reason, I'm just not a reader. So I have not read one other coach's coaching book.
Okay.
Ever. I mean, I know some great coaches, and they're outstanding coaches. You know, one of the girls who ran for me in college, her high school team and the boys team, she coaches the high school boys team, and they won the Eastern Regional in the Nike cross country this last year. And then there's Chris Fox up at Syracuse, who won nationals this year in cross country. Chris Fox, I think is great, and I even coached him a little while back when he was in Athletics West.
Okay.
But they haven't written books. You know, what I found is I like to talk to different runners who are really successful and ask them about different types of training.
Mm-hmm.
I knew one guy that was nice. He broke 4 minutes indoors many years ago in the mile, and all he did for 4 months, 3 times a week, a repetition workout. All he did. One day he ran 2200s, one day he ran 10 400s, and one day he ran 5 800s. He did that every week for 4 months. And the speed of those was always at a 62 second per 400 pace, even though 200s was 31. And he ran 356 off of that. And I've tried that kind of stuff with some of my runners. It works beautifully.
Yep.
Never trained as fast as they wanted to run in a mile, but they raced faster than they trained.
Gotcha.
If what you got to do is training's got to be within reason. You know, what I like to say is what you should do is try to train as slow as you possibly can to accomplish the maximum benefit. In other words, if running repeat 800s in 230 will make you as good as running them in 220, then why would you run them in 220?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. The 220 might hurt you.
Right.
Give you an injury. So I like to say, what's the slowest that you can train and accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, rather than how fast can you train and not accomplishing anything any better.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes tons of sense. Has there been anything that you would say has changed, or what's maybe changed the most since you started coaching to the work you're doing now? Have there been shifts or things you've seen develop that really influence how you coach runners?
I haven't really changed my own self, really.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a good question. What's changed over all the years? I think when I asked my elite runners who were my subjects in my research, when I asked them what they felt had changed the most, they said that there was, well, the two things they said was there's money available now.
Yeah, that's a big change.
And it's weird how they also said there's more scientific knowledge available about running. And obviously you can't help that. I mean, people are going to do research, and then when somebody finds something with a research project, somebody else will try to follow up on that with something else. And so obviously we have learned more about the physiology of sport. And we use it sometimes to change training a little bit. I can remember talking to a really great world-renowned coach one time, and he said that you didn't need to run more than 100 miles a week to be a good marathoner. Well, that's okay. I asked him, what he was basing that on, and he said he personally tried 120 and felt miserable. So he figured it's not good to do more than 100.
Yeah, simple size of one. There you go.
Yeah. So there's lots of ways to look
Yeah.
at what's changed and what's going on. One of the worst things that's changed is the drug situation. That's just awful. I mean, it's been going on for a long time, but it seems to be getting worse and worse.
Yeah.
The people who make them are ahead of the people who can identify them.
Right.
And that's really sad.
Well, I know we're coming up on, I think, the time, and we appreciate you hanging out and rescheduling with us. We apologize about that. But if folks want to keep up with you and keep up with the work that you're doing, is there any place that you'd point them towards?
I tell people if they're interested at all in training and stuff, they ought to look up the Run Smart project.
Okay.
But I don't run it. I write workouts for it.
Okay.
But it's just runsmartproject.com.
Okay.
And I think it's doing pretty well.
Yeah. Well, thank you for hanging out with us and chatting with us as always about running. We always love talking with you, and it's always a pleasure and an honor. And we just want to say thank you so much for what you do and continue to do throughout all the years. So we had a blast chat.
Okay, I'll try to keep doing it.
That sounds great. We'll keep watching. We'll keep learning. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.